Well, hi and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to discuss question 20, Indian Society, GS Paper 1, 2023 mains. What does the question say? Discuss the impact. Discuss the impact of post-liberal economy on ethnic identity and communalism. So when we're using the word post-liberal economy, we mean to say in India, usually post-LPG reforms, or a period that starts after 1991-92, right? So that kind of a period. And what that really means is when we started to open our economy to private capital, both Indian as well as Western or international. And thereby there was this whole wide scope for all these international players to come into India, big money to come into India, and that changed a lot of things. Right. So impact of that on ethnic identity and communalism. What do we mean by ethnic identity? Well, the word ethnic is used in multiple different ways actually. In the West, they often use ethnic interchangeably with racial, like African Americans, white Americans, they refer to that as ethnic differences. In India, often we use the word ethnic more interchangeably with tribals, that Kuki tribes, Zomi tribes, the Naga tribes or other tribes. So that is how we usually tend to use the word ethnic. Technically, sociologically, the word ethnic can be used whenever even one aspect of culture is shared, meaning you're a Bengali, so you share a language, or you're a Hindu or a Muslim, so you share a religion, or you are, you're somebody who shares a certain caste, right? So Reddis or Gaudas or Jats or Jats, so they also can be called ethnicity. But here we are going to mostly use the word in its popular way that it is being used. So discuss the impact of post-liberal economy on ethnic identity and communalism. Communalism is about the misuse of religion and the misinterpretation of religion to spread hate, to promote this idea that all communities cannot prosper together, that people belonging to different religious faiths are fundamentally different, and that their interests clash with each other, and that one community can only prosper if other communities decline. The manifestations of this kind of communalism, of this kind of a mindset, can be in many different ways. It could be in organized segregation, in the propagation of biases and prejudices, or directly, outrightly communal riots. Right. So communalism is a whole set of this mental ideology, and which is manifested into a lot of these ways of discrimination. Now, the question says, discuss the impact of the economy, post-liberal, on ethnic identity and communalism. We're going to start by saying that what do we mean by post-liberal economy? So we're saying it's a time period when the government-controlled regulated economy shifted towards open market-driven, private investment-led one, post this LPG period reforms. So that's what we're meaning to. That's what we're explaining in the first paragraph. Second, we want to go ahead and say, right out on the point, what's the positive impact? What's the negative impact? Positive first. Well, first of all, when growth is happening faster, usually everybody is happy. The point is that people tend to focus on the progress they can make, on the social mobility they can have, on how they can use the existing institutional opportunities to rise up higher and improve their own economic conditions. And so these are times which have relatively lesser conflict, which has lesser communalism, which has lesser ethnic identity disputes, because people tend to focus on their own mobility, their own progress within the economic system. So we find to see that in the 2000s, obviously, India was growing at a pretty good near 10% growth rate. I mean, double-digit growths nearly, and that means there's quite a lot of money coming in. So people tend to focus on developmental economics and access to social mobility, improving their personal situation. So this reduces conflict of ethnic or communal nature. Second, with more money coming in, the state also has more resources to allocate to welfare schemes. And that means a lot of the core deprivations that exist on the ground are being more effectively addressed than before, because there is more money going around in circulation in welfare schemes. And that means that people feel part of the process of the engagement, that they are being taken care of. They have more faith in the system. There are lesser clashes. They feel more empowered as a result of these welfare schemes. Right. So these are positive aspects to what happened with regards to ethnic identity and communalism. So conflict was de-emphasized from here. However, there is also the other part of the impact, the negative one. So development is not uniform everywhere. And we obviously have certain areas where more money is pouring in contrast to others. Capital is concentrated in certain regions, not distributed equally. Those regions experience a lot of in-migration, a lot of people trying to come in because opportunities are there in limited zones. And when there's a lot of migration coming in, it starts the politics. And we find son of the soil kind of politics. Son of the soil politics is where people claim that this land is only mine, belonging to the native language speaking or whatever native community is, and that other people are unwelcome. So this starts off in an anti-migrant kind of political dynamics, and that we have seen quite significant in many areas. Second, a lot of private capital as it came into India, a lot of this private capital tried to acquire obviously land because they were setting up new industries or putting money into new projects. So a lot of land acquisition happened. And a large part of these forested areas which are being cut down or being reutilized, diverted for private development or whatever else, this means that tribals have to be displaced. That a lot of people who are living indigenously on this land settled, they are being displaced with all these new projects. So a lot of these tribals, they get displaced from where they're traditionally living and come into contact with the mainstream populations as a result of this displacement. Without express efforts to save or preserve their culture, unique distinctiveness, way of life, they often end up losing their cultural identity and distinctiveness, become assimilated into the mainstream, linguistically, cultural wise, and that continues to happen. So ethnic identity is weakened and diluted in that way. Then we see that the post-liberal economy opened up the door for the West with all the influence, from the Hollywood and the media and everything that it brought, Western ideals. A lot of people saw that as Western corruption, resulting in decadence of their own culture. And so there was the thing that we see is homogenization. That is the Western culture starting to hugely influence Indian culture. And in that way, the traditional identity is being diffused. However, there's a reaction to it. Right? So we are talking about fundamentalism. Right? So there is this fundamentalist reaction to this westernization of the culture. So people react with a kind of hyper ethnic nationalism, focusing on this is mine, and they feel that maybe their language is being threatened, maybe their culture is being threatened, and there is hyper ethnic nationalism. So ethnic identity and even religious communal identity, often religious identity, is overemphasized, right? And this kind of becomes a reverse, like a reaction to this. Then we see that the Gulf money had started to pour in as oil was discovered in the Gulf, but post LPG this really started at a bigger scale. A lot of people who have immigrated to the Gulf, they're getting back the money, right? And as the money starts to flow into India, it starts to change the land ownership patterns. For example, in Kerala, a lot of land starts to change hands between religious communities, right? And this starts to create a certain simmer, a background discontent, which is often expressed in communal terms, right? Of this versus that religion. But the essential issue obviously is change in land ownership patterns. And people, shape that discontent, give expression to that discontent in terms of communalism, right? Obviously, we know that communalism isn't really about religion. It's about Everything else, things like relative deprivation or perception of relative deprivation or power struggle, but it's not really about religion or identity itself. And this is what we get to learn, right, about this relationship between post-liberal economy and ethnic identity and communalism, that these things are not really about the community culture or religion itself. They're mostly about the ideas of relative deprivation or the power struggles that people have. And thereby, our takeaway is that we should look at them in the right context, because it's primarily often the economic factors which are driving these subsequent factors. Everything cannot be reduced to economy. Obviously, there are independent concerns, but this is a major influence. Right. And that is our takeaway for the answer. Thank you, class. See you next time.